All About the Carbon Cycle by Kelsey, Michaela, Taylor, and Kelly. The composition of Earth's atmosphere, as shown on this diagram. Atmosphere composition in its percentages and trace gases in its percentages. The atmosphere is composed of a mix of several different gases in different amounts. The permanent gases whose percentages do not change from day to day are nitrogen, oxygen, and argon. Nitrogen accounts for 78% of the atmosphere, oxygen 21%, and argon 0.9%. Gases like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and ozone are trace gases that account for about 0.1% of the atmosphere. Water vapor is unique in that the concentration varies from 0 to 4% on the atmosphere depending on where you are and what time of day it is. In the cold, dry Arctic regions, water vapor usually accounts for less than 1% of the atmosphere, while in humid tropical regions, water vapor can account for almost 4% of the atmosphere. Water vapor content is very important in predicting weather. Greenhouse gases. What exactly is a greenhouse gas? It is any various gaseous compound, such as carbon dioxide, that absorbs infrared radiation, traps heat in the atmosphere, and contributes to the greenhouse effect. How do greenhouse gases in the atmosphere affect us? Greenhouse gases, whose percentages vary daily, seasonally, and annually, have physical and chemical properties which make them interact with solar radiation and infrared light given off from the Earth to affect the energy balance of the globe. This is why scientists are watching and observing the increase in greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane carefully, because even though that they are small amounts, they can strongly affect the globe's energy balance and temperature over time. An overview of the carbon cycle. All living things are made of carbon. Carbon is also a part of the ocean, air, and even rocks. Because the Earth is a dynamic place, carbon does not stay still. It is on the move. In the atmosphere, carbon is attached to some oxygen in a gas called carbon dioxide. Plants use carbon dioxide and sunlight to make their own food and grow. The carbon becomes part of the plant. Plants that die and are buried may turn into fossil fuels, made of carbon like coal and oil over millions of years. When humans burn fossil fuel, most of the carbon quickly enters the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and traps heat in the atmosphere. Without it and other greenhouse gases, Earth would be a frozen world. But humans have burned so much fuel that there is about 30% more carbon dioxide in the air today than there was 150 years ago, and Earth is becoming a warmer place. In fact, ice cores have shown us that there is now more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than there was 420,000 years ago.
Moving on to carbon reservoirs, we can break down the reservoirs into two larger categories, the first being the atmosphere, land, biosphere, ocean carbon reservoir, and then the rock reservoir. Starting with the first category, we can look at the atmosphere carbon reservoir. This reservoir contains roughly 850 gigatons of carbon and has a turnover rate of 4 years. What this turnover rate means is that a carbon atom will spend roughly 4 years in this reservoir before being moved to a different one. In regards to the movement between the reservoirs, the atmosphere sends carbon to the land biosphere through the photosynthesis performed by plants and then the subsequent plant consumption by animals and other organisms. The atmosphere also sends carbon to the mixed layer, which is the top 100 meters of the ocean, through the dissolving of CO2 in water, which turns it into carbonic acid. If we then move to the land biosphere contains roughly 2,500 gigatons of carbon and has a turnover rate of 21 years. The land biosphere sends carbon back to the atmosphere through the decomposition of organic matter, but the land biosphere also sends carbon into a category known as permafrost through the freezing of organic matter, and this permafrost contains roughly 1,700 gigatons of carbon. If we move to the mixed layer, first recalling that this is the top 100 meters of ocean, this layer contains 900 gigatons of carbon and has a turnover rate of approximately 5 years. This reservoir sends carbon back to the atmosphere through the breakdown of carbonic acid into CO2 and water, And it also sends carbon to another reservoir known as the deep ocean. The deep ocean is the remaining 97% of the ocean that is not covered in the mixed layer. This exchange occurs through ocean currents mixing the two layers of water together, causing the movement of carbon, and also through sinking organic matter from the mixed layer into the deep ocean layer. Looking at the rock reservoir as a whole, it's not known precisely how much carbon it contains. It's estimated to be millions upon millions of gigatons of carbon, and it exchanges with the entire atmosphere, land biosphere, ocean carbon reservoir at a very slow rate of 0.1 gigatons of carbon per year. The rock reservoir has a turnover rate for carbon of roughly 460,000 years. Exchanges to the atmosphere occur through volcanic eruptions, and carbon is received in the rock reservoir through the atmosphere with chemical weathering, such as acid rain, putting carbon back into rock matter, and from the land biosphere with the conversion of organic matter to fossil fuels.
A major part of the carbon cycle happens in photosynthesis and respiration. During photosynthesis, diatomic oxygen is released into the atmosphere. During respiration, which is the opposite of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is released back into the atmosphere. The net effect of this interaction is sunlight to power living creatures. In this interaction, if the carbon in plants was not released back into the atmosphere by respiration, it was then converted to fossil fuels through millions of years of high pressure and heat. Humans use these fossil fuels for energy, and that is primarily how they have altered the carbon cycle. In the combustion of fossil fuels, the carbon combines with oxygen, which produces not only energy but carbon dioxide. The energy is then used as a power source, while the carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere. If humans were to not use fossil fuels, they would eventually be slowly released back to carbon in the atmosphere. And humans are using fossil fuels rapidly. It is anticipated we will run out of them within the next few hundred years. Because of our extraction of fossil fuels, there is an excess of pathways for carbon to escape back into the atmosphere. Humans have also altered the carbon cycle by cutting down trees and eliminating forests in a process called deforestation. This is even more detrimental if the trees are eliminated by fire, which releases more carbon that is stored in the trees into our atmosphere. There are 400 molecules of carbon dioxide in every million molecules of air. This means that carbon dioxide makes up about 0.04% of the atmosphere. And while this number is incredibly small, it is still the primary greenhouse gas emitted by humans, which is contributing to modern climate change. Carbon dioxide helps trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere. Without it, human life would not be sustainable. That being said, the increase in carbon through the burning of fossil fuels is unnatural and damaging to our planet, creating what we used to refer to as global warming.
Many people speculate that the carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere could potentially be coming from an increase in volcanic activity, an excess of plant respiration over photosynthesis, or perhaps even an increase in oceanic activity. So how do we know that the fossil fuel combustion is the cause for the excess of CO2 in the atmosphere? There are two main reasons that point to the burning of fossil fuels as the cause. The first is the obvious increase in human activity surrounding carbon dioxide. If the cause were unrelated to humans, the value of CO2 would stay the same. However, the increase each year has been equal to about half of what humans have released into the atmosphere. This rate is increasing fast each year. The second reason points to carbon fingerprinting. By counting the number of a particular carbon isotope, scientists can ascertain that the carbon emissions are coming from plants. However, are those plants of today or long-dead plants found in fossil fuels? The answer lies in the carbon-14 isotope. It is radioactive and therefore is unstable and will return to nitrogen-14 after a certain amount of time. For plants that have been dead for millions of years, the carbon-14 is long gone. This is key to remember when looking at carbon isotopes. When measuring the isotopes found in carbon emissions, they are all radiocarbon dead, meaning that they don't have carbon-14. If the carbon was coming from live plants, it would contain carbon-14. The excess of CO2 in the atmosphere is coming from the burning of fossil fuels and not from modern-day plants.